Hello! Welcome to another episode of Listen Now, Read Later, the podcast that leads you to your next favorite novel by reading you short stories. This time, join us for a special book club episode where we are going to talk about episodes 11 through 14. So we've got me, Allison here, and then Teresa and Megan. Hi, ladies!
Hi. So excited for another book club.
Yes.
Always a great day.
Yes. My favorite.
So we had some interesting sandwiching happening here because we have lonely people on the first end and twist endings on the back end, and in between we just have a lot of very unusual love stories.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I kind of love that bookending thing we had going on.
For
a
sure.
Reverse bookending. But it feels so long ago, but we did start this section with Midnight Library. Which is such a great book about what makes life meaningful and all the different ways our choices can affect us.
Yeah.
But we also had two very kind of unusual short stories. In that one, we had The Bowl, which is told in the second person, and we had Signs of Life, which has this weird structure of one conversation continues happening as you're having all of these flashback pieces. So very, very fun and very interesting to hear audibly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really was. It was fun to record, and I just remember reading The Bowl this time around and scrolling through it and being like, oh, second person, exciting.
Yeah.
I find a bowl. I get emotionally attached to this bowl. I give up the bowl.
Yes.
Which was kind of fun and different, and I really I'm glad you've introduced us to Amy Bender because I like reading her stuff. I always know when I'm gonna read Amy Bender, I'm gonna have a good time.
It's so true.
Absolutely.
It's so true.
Yeah.
And it might be a sad good time, or a kind of depressing good time, but also usually kind of a funny good time.
Yes.
So I like that a lot.
Well, and she's got such a special brand of quirky that it's just so fun. I love that I used this story in one of my classes this semester, and just in the middle, she's like, hey, bro, can you set me up with one of your fireman buddies, And we were talking in class, we're like, okay, why might this be included, And, it's so fun.
It's so fun.
Yes.
But yeah. And then Signs of Life, I thought was funny. That was, we needed a last-minute sub-in for voices, so my mom made her podcast debut.
Very
nice.
And she definitely, partway through, she heard somebody else, read something, make a mistake, pause, and start over. She goes, wait, I can redo my lines. I'm like, oh, did I not mention that?
This is going to be edited.
Right.
You can have as many takes as you want.
That's so sweet.
Which is always a special privilege in the old-timey stories. I've got some very fun audio on those.
Oh my goodness.
But yeah, so it was fun watching her experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that author, Miriam Kuznets, she was so sweet. She was like, where can I find the podcast and where can I listen to it? And she was excited when we put it out, and it was just really fun.
I love that. It's fun.
That makes me so happy.
Hearing about people's reactions.
I
to
know.
this and stuff too.
Amy Bender's been so sweet too. She's let us use 4 stories?
I know. I
It's
love
been
that.
so
Yeah,
fun.
absolutely.
It's been so fun.
Oh, that's so awesome.
But yeah.
Yeah. And then recommending Midnight Library, I was just thinking about the reason I think you told me to read Midnight Library.
Did I?
I think so, because I remember we were at Andy's. I feel like I was either telling you about reading it and you were like, oh, I've read that book, or you told me to read it and I was like, oh, that's interesting, I should read that book. But what I remember most about reading Midnight Library is the concept is really cool. You're in a near-death experience and you go to this library that just contains all of the infinite choices you could have made and all the lives you could have lived. And while the book was really interesting and made me think about things, and I liked the story, the idea of it was a lot more interesting to me.
Yeah.
What would my Midnight Library look like?
Yeah, it makes you think.
Yeah, and so I thought that was pretty cool.
That is really
It's
cool.
also an extremely British book, though. It is there were times that I was just listening to the book.
Did you listen to it?
I listened to it.
Because so the narrator is Carey Mulligan.
Okay.
And I tried to listen to it on one of my drives to Minnesota and literally had to turn it off. She was putting me to sleep. And not in like a bad way. It was just her voice was so relaxing.
Yeah.
And I was on this stretch of infinite highway and I was like, oh, I can close my eyes. And it's like, no.
Don't do that.
Little bedtime story.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's so funny.
Yeah.
But yes, very British.
Very British.
It's so fun.
Yeah.
That book, I really love the use of the like Facebook posts and things.
Ooh.
Like it'll be like, oh, because the main character attempts suicide, and so it'll be like the second to last post she made, the last post she made, and they're just kind of interspersed, and they just give such an interesting insight into her state of mind. But it also is just such an interesting thing to think about. I don't know, just the way we use social media and the fact that, like, sometimes people who are really struggling, that is a way they try to reach out. And just thinking about, like, what do you do if you see something like that scroll across your screen?
Yeah.
You know, like, what is your responsibility?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's really interesting to take that piece and, I don't know, like the idea of this like mystical midnight library feels very like ancient-y almost.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a cool,
Like, melding of the times.
yeah.
Absolutely.
I like that. I think that's
That
cool
is
too.
really cool.
Yeah,
Playing with
for
some
sure.
different elements. I'm always a sucker for multimedia stuff in books.
Yes.
Letters, social media,
Yes.
text, PowerPoint presentations.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Speaking of, so that's a reference to A Visit from the Goon Squad.
Yes.
For those who have not read it, we highly recommend.
So good.
Yes.
And
I'll read that
so my students are doing a literary analysis right now, and I had to find short stories that I thought they could write 5 pages about, right? And so I picked one from that book because all of the chapters of those books, like half of them were published as standalone short stories.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And one of my students comes in last week and she goes, is this the end of the story? And I'm like, what do you mean? And I was like, maybe the website glitched and she didn't see. And she like shows me, I'm like, no, that's the end. And she goes, so we just leave it here? And I was like, well, there is a book that it's in. And I'm like, you can find out more, but it's like, there's a time jump. Like, you can find out, because it's the Ask Me If I Care. And it's the one where the teenagers on the music scene and the girl runs away with the older man.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, like, we find out what happens to them, like, 20, 30 years later.
Yeah.
But we don't, like, get the next day, you know?
None of those stories are, like, the same perspective.
Right, yeah.
All
There's not a
different.
single repeated POV in the book.
You see some of the same characters, but
Yeah.
it's, like, totally different.
But, yeah, so it was so interesting seeing them, because I read the book. I didn't read any of the short stories first. I read the book. And so seeing them, like, just get that piece of it and seeing their reactions was really fun.
That is really fun.
It is fun to share stories with your kids.
Oh, I know.
Especially those fun offbeat ones, like the ones we've been reading on the
Yes.
podcast. I feel like we've been very like quirky and offbeat recently.
Well, go ahead.
It's so fun to know what's gonna happen and then know when to like look at their reactions.
Yeah.
You know, like that's one of my favorite parts of reading books with the kids. Is like, today is going to be the day that the big reveal happens, and they have no idea it's coming.
That's so true. But in speaking of like offbeat quirky, our second episode for this round, Wrecking Ball, we had someone going through reverse evolution, and we had someone randomly deciding to rent an apartment like 3 blocks from their house and just not be a part of their regular life for decades, and then waltz back in as if nothing happened. So it's like, these are two super weird stories. They're so fascinating.
I love how far apart in time they are.
Yes.
Yeah.
Amy Bender and Nathaniel Hawthorne.
Right.
Yeah.
We've got what? So that's 100 and, can I do math? Let's see. That's 162 years between these publications.
Wow.
Which, now that I'm looking at the original publication information, just got a shout out, like, our Amy Bender story in this episode was originally published in the Missouri Review.
Go Missouri.
You know, as a St. Louis-based podcast, always fun.
That's so fun.
But yeah, just such crazy stories. But it was so fun to get to use them as an excuse to talk about Melina Marchetta, because Megan and I are huge fans of Jellicoe Road. And so we didn't get to talk about that book.
Yeah.
But we did get to talk about Looking for Alibrandi, which was one of her other books, and is, I don't know, we're in such a bubble when it comes to, like, talking about the mixing of ethnicities and races and things in America. Like, we look at it from a very, like, American perspective. So this book talked a lot about what the attitudes are towards the Italian population in Australia, which is, like, something I didn't know even existed.
Yeah.
You know? Like, you think of everyone in Australia either being, like, originally Australian or from England. Like, you don't think about, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that was really interesting.
Yeah, that was really interesting. I thought it was, I felt kind of like it was a story that I'd heard before. Like, the idea of it was a story I heard before, right? Like, a girl in high school who has a single mom, like, meeting her dad, right? That's been done before. But I felt like this one was still very unique. And I couldn't exactly put my finger on what it was. Maybe it was it was Australia and their dynamics there. And, but it was fascinating. And it was really good.
That's cool.
It was really easy. It was a really easy read.
It was.
And I had just a lot of fun, like, going through it and just hearing. She was a good perspective to read from too.
Yeah.
So I had fun with that one.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I don't know if this is the difference, because I agree. I felt like, you know, we have first love, we have, like, estranged father coming back into the picture. Like, it was all pieces that you've heard before. But I wonder if she kind of imbues a certain realism into it. Because she was willing to say, like, first loves might not work out. Yeah. And, like, maybe the father you thought you were going to hate, maybe you will like him, you know? Right. And, like, it's, she has this optimism of, like, what can be the future without making it storybookish. Yeah. You know, it feels very grounded in reality.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that definitely was part of it. It felt real, for sure.
Yeah. So then after that, we had The Darling, which we love Anton Chekhov. I don't know if you guys caught in one of the... So, like, when we have these repeat authors, I try to, like, change up how I introduce them each time. And so I got to share... Chekhov has a quote, because he was a licensed doctor. But pre-World War II, Russia didn't necessarily put a premium on healthcare. And so he wasn't making enough money as a doctor. That's why he started publishing his writing.
That's crazy.
I know. Like, what a reversal of roles. Like,
so true.
Like, nowadays it'd be like, I can't make a living writing, so maybe I'll try to be a doctor, you know?
Maybe I'll try to be a doctor. Megan, if you're listening.
Right.
We're not going to do that, we promise.
No one will let me into med school.
Yes.
But... So he has this quote where he says, medicine is my lawful wife and literature is my mistress. When I get fed up with one, I spend the night with the other. And so he basically, what I did in, like, looking up how to, like, give a bio for him, I found out that basically he started with, like, these really, like, silly little sketches. And then, like, people like Tolstoy were like, dude, you have talent. Maybe you should take it seriously. And so we end up with these, like, really cool short stories.
Yeah.
That's
because,
so cool.
like, the Russian greats thought he was worth noticing. And, like, that's just...
so cool.
Man, what a time to be alive. You know?
Yeah.
I love hearing about historical contemporaries, like people who are alive around the same
like
time.
Like them interacting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because it's so cool. It's like, oh my gosh, you knew them?
Right.
That's crazy.
I know.
Yeah. So that's pretty cool.
That's
I
cool.
can't imagine, like, I don't know what would be an equivalent today, but it'd be pretty cool. Like, Suzanne Collins comes up to you and she's like, hey, you got talent.
Right.
You're like talking
to...
You should write stuff.
Right. It's like, okay.
Pulse in my head is like, yeah, you got the right stuff.
Right.
Like,
I know. Like,
I do?
Oh my gosh. It'd be so overwhelming.
Yeah.
And I just,
so
like,
true.
of course you're going to have to start taking it seriously because so-and-so, you know?
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's cool.
That was an interesting story too. It was like, the main character was a woman who was like, kind of finding her place and like putting her purpose in a lot of different places, and it wasn't working out for her. Yeah. And she like constantly needed to be like falling back on someone. And it was really interesting I don't know. It was a really interesting take for that time period.
Yeah.
It is.
It seems like a very modern.
And that author.
Yeah.
Well, and also just like, I thought it was really interesting. There's a line in the story where they mention some kind of behavior. I think it's how quick she gets married after she's widowed. She gets remarried. And they said something like, with anyone else, this behavior wouldn't have been accepted in the town, but because it was her and people liked her, you know, like, they just thought like, oh yeah, this is who she is, this is how she is, you know. And it was so interesting thinking about, yes, there's so many modern things happening here, but also like the things that just certain people like inspire an okayness with you in, you know, like it's like, yeah, she's on her, like, by the end, she's on her, like, third relationship or something. And, like, a lot of people you would think to judge.
Yeah.
Because, like, oh, you had these things happen. But with her, you're just like, no, she's just still trying, you know?
Yeah.
Like, she's just not giving up. Yeah.
I was just kind of surprised how, like,
Yeah.
Chekhov,
Yeah.
a Russian man in the 1800s,
Yeah.
could capture this, like, I feel like kind of a distinctly feminine issue.
And I feel like that could be like an indie TV show today, like of, like that kind of same theme. And it's just, it's so crazy.
No, but it's true. It's very like, it's never judgmental towards her.
Yeah.
It's always very much like, and she is someone who it would be easy to judge because she like has no personal identity, you know, and it more is just like,
this is her finding her life, and like, this is what she does to do it, and you're like, you know, you wish for her to find the best thing.
Right, like if anything, you almost pity her. You never feel bad about her.
Yeah, and you're never like, oh, she's one of those women, you know? That's not the way he tells the story at all.
Perspective.
Yeah, and I thought that was really interesting.
It is really cool. And yet I had known that I just, you know, like the story resonated with me. I hadn't really thought about, like you're saying, that I don't know how common that perspective was in 1899 Russia, you know?
Right.
Like we don't, Yeah. That's really cool.
It is cool.
Yeah.
And well, in that episode, we got to recommend one of Teresa's favorite books ever.
When I realized I could recommend this book, I reread the whole series in like 3 days. I love The Girl of Fire and Thorns. I could sing the praises of Girl of Fire and Thorns forever and ever. It's by Ray Carson, and I love, she's got other books that she's written that are really good, but this is the one. It is, the story is fantastic. It's the best character arc I have ever read. In the beginning of the series, you meet this girl, and she's, she like knows herself to be like physically weak, and she's very insecure about her weight, and she's very young, but she's got a couple things going for her. She is very smart, like she knows it, because she studies a lot, and she's like, she specifically likes to study, like her favorite book to study is like their battle like guidebook, basically, the strategy book. And then she also has like it's called a godstone, so like at her christening, she was like given a stone in her belly button that like designated her as chosen by God to do some great work. And this is like, you know, it's a fictional religion made up in this story, but it's like a, you know, a monotheistic kind of thing that a lot of people will be familiar with, but there's like a sorcery element to it too.
Sure.
Very
fantasy.
And then she marries the king of a nearby kingdom, and she has to like come out of the shadows a little bit, and it is not like she immediately figures it out. Not even close. Like over the 3 books, she grows and changes so much in such a positive way. And whenever I read this book, I just think about like how I wish when authors were writing like books that they want to be feminist and want to be empowering to women, I wish they were written like this. Because it feels real, and the whole it's like a high fantasy story, right? There's magic, and there's like there's like prophecies and foreign lands and stuff, and all kinds of things like that. But within that is like, there's just this really realistic way that people become leaders, and like you're like called to do things by the people around you that are needed. And she finds an inner strength, and she also pulls strength from the people she cares about. And she makes you see her step by step make genuine friendships, and then just like she falls in love multiple times over the course of the series. And it's just so genuine, and I cannot put the books down once I pick them up either. They're just fantastic. I talk about them forever. But
oh my gosh, I need to reread that series because I read it in high school.
Yes, I made Megan read it in
high school. And it's just I remember loving it, but that makes me want to reread it.
That's the other thing. Excellent cast of characters, and we all know, we're big fans of good cast of characters with like the Literary Chronicles best cast characters ever. But Girl of Fire and Thorns also excellent cast of characters. I just you like come to love them all and care about them so much.
I feel like I really am impressed when fantasy or even like Lunar Chronicles sci-fi fantasy authors are able to make those characters feel so real, because it's so easy to get lost in the world building elements and like lose some of that reality of like their personality and their growth, like you were talking about, and just making them feel very grounded. So it's very impressive.
So I recommend those books all the time. I bought the trilogy for my classroom. I've had a couple of kids read them at school. That's cool. Because they're not like super well-known books. Like they're bestsellers, but from quite a while ago.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm always handing them out. Got my college roommate to read them too.
Oh, nice.
Then she made her mom read them. Like it was just it's so good. I
love that.
I love that series so much.
I read the first book in college and loved it, and then I got super busy and never finished the series. So this is reminding me that I need to go back and finish it.
The second book is my favorite.
Really?
The first book is excellent.
Nice.
The second book is my favorite. It's
That's
so
impressive.
It's so
I feel like the second book in a trilogy isn't always
usually
the
not the best. But I mean, like Catching Fire is like another one of those exceptions.
That's true. You're right.
That's another exception.
Yeah.
Because
the third book is still very good, but the second book I feel like it just
that's good for the middle of the story to be like your favorite.
Yes.
Really
that's like Catching Fire is the only other one I can think of. So like that's really high praise to be able to be on that. That's
did
awesome.
it very well. It's very necessary second book.
Well, and also just like the themes you're talking about, like we talked about how nice that is just to see as a woman, but also like in YA, I mean that's part of why I love young adult fiction, is that you can really say important things at an age where people need to hear them. Absolutely. Like there are a lot of middle schoolers and early high schoolers who need to be told, hey, just because you feel weak now doesn't mean you can't become strong. Or hey, you're gonna fall in love multiple times and that's okay. And like I don't know, that's just so important. And I feel like because I don't know, I feel like sometimes people want to say that children's literature is easier or simpler or not as artful or important, and it's like it's so I mean it lays the foundation for so many personalities and life journeys and choices. Like
it's really formative to
it's so formative
too. There are tons of books that I've read that I still think about those concepts. Like absolutely still relevant to my life.
Well, and still think about the way they explain them to you. You know, like
that's how you learned it.
It is like we talked about last time how there was that weird like focus on mental health that happened in young adult when we were kids, and it's like, I was talking to my mom the other day about how there's such a generational gap between our parents and our generation about how mental health is thought about, because like our parents' generation just didn't grow up exposed to talking about it. And I mean, for a lot of us, those books, even if we look back on them and say they could have been done better, that's how we learn to talk about it, and we learn to
conversation,
and we learn to like talk about it with our friends. Like we learn to say, "Hey, this is a really interesting story. You should read it too."
Like normalize, like even being able to talk about mental health, in your everyday life.
So like, it just can be so powerful.
Absolutely.
But ever since Teresa mentioned walking into her classroom and being excited for kids to notice the big reveal, I've been excited for us to get to the last episode in this round, the How Did It End? Because all it could make me think about was we were reading these stories, and the friends that were helping us read had not read them yet. We were reading them fresh, and the gasps that we got on the bloopers of them realizing the ending was just my life.
The facial expressions were like,
yes.
What? They were just like, they're
so
like wide-eyed, just like,
oh my gosh.
That's what's gonna happen at the end of this story.
Yeah. Like with Story of an Hour, like we all read that in high school. We're very familiar with this story. It's kind of like, I don't want to say it's old news to us, but like we know
it's
the story. Yeah. And so the girl who helped us read that one had not ever read the story before.
Yeah.
And so when we get to the point where it's like her husband walked in the door, there was just a and it was like, all right, you get to experience this for the first time. Like, that's so fun. And then, like, with Sleepy, I think that is the most dramatic reading that we've done. I think Sleepy, like, or I guess I should say, I think of all the stories, the one that it made the most difference for me hearing it has been Sleepy. Yeah. Because it was the little lullaby and
it was my crotchety old lady voice.
Yes.
That's really what did it.
That's what did it.
I was quite sick at that point. With so I think that's what did it.
I think you're right.
That's what sold it for you.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like that's one where hearing it really tells you, like, it really, like, made it real for me in a cool way. Mm-hmm. You know?
That's cool. That's awesome.
Oh, what a spooky story.
Yeah.
I was
Good time for spooky stories.
Yes, I was glad it was in October. But yeah, just hearing the little, like, hush-a-bye, my baby, I will sing a song.
Oh, yes.
And, like, knowing what's coming.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yep. That was good.
Yes.
Yeah. And then, to recommend with that, Allison was like, you should read this book. It's called The Grace Year, and...
Speaking of feminist books.
Yeah, speaking of feminist books, it's, you know, women have this evil magic, and they had to be sent out of the community to get rid of it. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, and she was like, the ending, though, it's just like, it would really work, I think. And I was like, okay. So I read the book, and I listened to it, and it was like, grotesque. Like, I was like listening to it on my way home.
Like, and I do not remember, like, I read it on paper, so maybe I skimmed past some things that I don't realize I skimmed past, but
I was just listening to it on my drive to and from work and being like, I think I'm gonna throw up. This is so horrifying. And then, like, the author does a really good job of making you feel like trapped in like there's no escape, there's no place to go with the main character, which is that's cool, because the book ends up being like, I feel like the author was like, what would happen if Lord of the Flies was girls? And personally, I don't know if this is exactly what would have happened.
I don't know, girls can be pretty vicious.
Yes, but it was what really, I was not sure about it because of how gross, how gross it was, and how gross it made me feel until I got to the end.
And that's the thing, is I was so glad that I got to tell you to read it in conjunction with this episode, because like, we knew the theme of this episode was twist ending, so I didn't have to spoil for you what was coming. Right. But every time I want to tell someone to read this book, I wish I could tell them everything will be worth it in the end. Yeah. Because it is a book that, like, I thought about, like, oh my gosh, do I want to keep going? Do I want to finish this? But the ending is just so good. Yeah. Because, like, and I think that was one of the things, is, like, one of my pet peeves that can happen when we're trying to get feminist in stories is when it gets to that point of, like, everyone is the problem but me. Like, I'm the only one who sees what should be fixed.
I'm not like other girls.
Right. And this book calls that out. Yes. And you don't think it's going to, because you've got this main character who feels that way, who she thinks she's the only one who sees the problem, and she's the only one who knows the way around it. And, like, we have that classic situation where she's mad at her male best friend for trying to, like, help her. Yeah. You know? And, like, she can't see that he's trying to help her because he's still, in her mind, working within the system, and you can't work within the system. You know? And her having to realize that other people are doing what she wants to do, and that other people see what she sees, and that she's not alone in that, is just so powerful to me. Because I think it's such an important message to be reminded that, like, whether it's a women's issue or whatever else, like, there's always a group of people experiencing it together. Yes. And that's an important part of it, you know?
Yeah, it was, because I was so nervous reading through it. I was like, is this just one of those YA books where, like, you know, the girl is...
She's so special
she's
and
so
different.
special and different.
Yeah.
And I loved that the ending changed
That's
that.
cool.
And that's, you know, you can still read the book and be surprised.
Yes.
You don't know exactly how.
You don't know what's going to come.
Yeah. But and so I after everything, I was like, okay, this is worth it to recommend to people.
Yes.
It was terrifying. And it's not my usual type of book.
Yeah. Well, and I love that,
was
like,
worth
it's an extremely pink book.
Yes.
Like,
very
you
pink.
you would not really necessarily know what's hiding behind the cover, because it's very, very pink.
It is very pink. I also, the other cool part was at the end of the audiobook, they had an interview with the author.
Oh.
And so listening
cool.
to her talk about it, I just, like, got more and more behind her and behind the book.
Yeah,
I was like, okay, I see what you're trying to do here, and I
That's so
appreciate
cool.
it. And I was pretty sure that's where you were going with the end of the book, but now that you're talking
Just
about
to
it,
hear it, yeah,
I'm
that's
really
cool.
glad.
No, that's really cool.
Yeah, so there's been a couple of books I've listened to recently that have had interviews with the author at the end.
That's so cool.
Kind of like them.
I love that.
I
It's
love
almost
that.
like those, some of them will have like Q&A sections at the end. I love there's like, you can hear the author too,
Yeah,
talk
yeah.
about their book.
That's
Yes,
super fun.
That's different.
That's so cool. Well, that's all 4 of the episodes for this, so I guess it's time to talk about what we're reading now.
What are we reading
outside
now?
of our recommendations.
Yes.
So I am reading The 10,000 Doors of January, which
Mm-hmm.
I
Such
am
a pretty cover.
only... Oh, it's a gorgeous cover.
Yeah.
It is so good.
I'm only about 100 pages in, and I already want to tell everyone I know to read it.
So many highlights, so many notes.
So, oh my, so yeah, so
Yeah.
I have been completely, like, annotating it. I got special
Aw.
highlighters that I saw off someone's Bookstagram. I love it so much. My current writing project is very, like, the power of story and, like, mixing different mediums, and this does it. And this does it in a, like, historical setting rather than a fantasy setting,
Yeah.
but it still brings in that magic.
That's cool.
And then what's really cool is, like, so towards, like, I think it was about 40 pages in or so, you find out that the 10,000 Doors is a book. And so in between some of the chapters, you get chapters of the book, The
That's
10,000 Doors,
cool.
that the character is reading. And I don't know, I can just already feel that, like, something's going to collide here, you know? Like,
Yeah.
I'm very excited. And then it also has really interesting, like, it's set around the turn of, it's, like, set in, like, the 1910s. I always, like, when I say turn of the century, I'm never fully positive which
Is that 1890? Is that
right, like,
1990?
Yeah.
so I was like, I caught my
1800 to 1900. but-
right,
Yeah.
but, like, yeah,
At
I
what
caught
point?
myself being like, I don't want to use this phrase. I don't actually, I don't feel confident in what it means. But, like, it's set around that time, and so there's also a lot of, like, it's a man's world, it's a white man's world, and there's stuff that comes into that there. Because the main character is not white, but she's being raised by a very wealthy white man in her parents' absence.
Okay.
And he's, like, a collector of global artifacts. And, yeah, it's very interesting. And it's very, like, I don't know. I recently went to an event where this author spoke. And she said, she was talking about her next book that'll be coming out. And she's like, this next book is the scary ways stories can be used as, like, propaganda. And she goes, 10,000 Doors was the magic of what stories can be, like, the positive side of it. And I really love that. Because, like, yeah, definitely, like, anything can be turned into a weapon.
Yeah.
Right.
But I love something that just gorgeously says stories can save us.
Yeah.
You know?
I do love that.
Because
Cool.
I believe in their power. So,
Yeah.
but yeah,
That's so
very,
cool.
very uplifting so far.
We believe in
I love
stories
that.
in this podcast.
We
Yes.
like them.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Okay, so I just started reading Assistant to the Villain, which I picked up with you guys
Yes.
at a little, like, adult book fair we went to at a brewery set up by our local indie bookstore.
Yeah, shout out to the novel neighbor.
Yes.
We love novel names.
And I really like the cover because it's kind of wacky. It reminds me of Once Upon a Marigold, which I think I asked you guys if you read it and
I
you said no.
have not.
I don't think I have.
It's a middle grade, quirky, like, fairy tale retelling almost.
Okay.
and it's very cute. And that's what this book cover reminded me of. So I'm not very far, but you know, it's kind of like it doesn't take itself very seriously. I think that's what I like so far. About a villain who takes the main character as his assistant, but you know, of course, she's like got a huge crush on him because he's like super cute. And then I assume there are shenanigans and like adventures and stuff. So I'm excited to read it. It also feels kind of like Halloween themed. So
that's
fun. I'm not a super big like Halloween or fall person, but when the time is right. Yeah. And
Absolutely.
then audiobook wise, I started listening to Flowers for Algernon, which I was realizing as I started listening to it, like I've had it recommended so many times.
You never had to do
it's
that
on
in
my
middle
list.
school?
No. I didn't know what it was about.
Oh
I
gosh.
thought I did know what it was about. And like I realized that all I knew was that people said it was sad.
Yeah.
So
And it's a very specific brand of sad.
Yes.
It is.
so I'm like getting close to a quarter of the way in probably because I listened to it kind of a long time yesterday.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting so far, and I'm enjoying it. It's, you know, a very well told story, so I'm interested to see what else happens. And I didn't realize how blind I am going in, and so I'm excited. I'm excited to.
That's cool to know
read
that
this
the
one.
book is written well. We were supposed to read it, I want to say in like 7th or 8th grade, we were supposed to read it. And I think we like ran out of time. And so they showed us the movie. And like the movie was very good, but it was like heavy. It's,
Is Flowers for Algernon the one that like has a short story and a full-length book?
Yes.
Oh, it
They
does?
said
I
it was
feel like-
originally a short story, and that the author extended it to be a full length.
I can't remember if I read the short story or the book, but it was in middle school.
Yeah.
It might have been the short
Well,
story.
I was very surprised because like the audiobook is 9 hours long, which is
wow.
not a short novel necessarily.
No.
So
Yeah.
I was like, they got all of this. I'm confused. What was in the short story? Like,
Yeah,
what,
I have no idea.
what could have been captured in
Yeah.
a short story compared to this whole novel? So.
Yeah.
I would not even know how to fit that into a short story.
Yeah. So it's kind of a cool.
Yeah.
It's been cool so far. I have all these like books that, you know, everyone's read
Right.
in quotations that I've been meaning to read, and sometimes I just pick them up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, have the tissues nearby, because,
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. In your car.
I was just talking about it the other day I was like, oh yeah, sometimes I make my students cry in the books that we read in class. And I was like, wait, no, I think it was me. I make me cry in the books that I read to my kids out loud. So, note to self, make sure the tissues are nearby.
I make me cry.
That's so good.
I literally last year there was this book I was reading aloud to 6th grade, and I have 2 sections of 6th grade literature, and I read it to the first section and cried, and then I read it to the second section and cried again.
I know. What book was it?
Pictures of Hollis Woods.
Oh, I've never read
It's this really sweet book about a girl who was in foster care, and then she does these like flashbacks in pictures because she's an artist.
Cool.
Of like a time when she was with a good foster family, and they like wanted to
Is it a true
adopt
story?
her. No, it's not a true story. And then it shows you like those 2 times together, and you're like, why didn't she stay with that family?
Right.
So it's a little bit of a mystery.
Interesting.
But then the ending is like just like so beautiful,
Aw.
and it just makes me cry every time. So
Aw,
That's so sweet.
that's a good book.
Aw.
that's cool.
And there's a Hallmark movie version of it.
Oh, boy.
So
Oh my goodness.
I know. So I showed my kids the Hallmark movie, and
Aw.
it's so funny.
Oh,
But it is basically the book, but
that's cool.
Yeah.
it's so funny to have it as a Hallmark movie. There's not a lot
Yeah,
of
it's
like
like a little bit.
book adaptation
different
Hallmark
No,
movies.
yeah, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
That's
so funny.
I love that.
Well, on a very different note, I have been reading The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer, which is nonfiction.
Okay.
Nice.
But it's a really good book. I'm reading it with a small group that I lead, and we've been really loving it. Definitely a group of type A perfectionist
Yes.
eldest daughter.
We know nothing about that.
But it's been really great. I love John Mark Comer and the way that he explains things, and just talking about how, like, it's very normal in our world to live in a way that we aren't really meant to. So
Yeah.
that's been really good. But I figured I'd also talk about my recent romance, I hesitate to call it a rom-com read, which is The No-Show by Beth O'Leary. I love Beth O'Leary. I've read a couple books by her. She's also very British.
British is fun.
It is fun. I love when they use phrases and I'm like, what is that? Like, I think in each of her books she's talked about, I don't remember what they call it, but I think I've picked up, it's basically a bachelorette party.
Gotcha.
But they don't call it a bachelorette party.
That's so funny.
I think it's really funny that comes up in each of her books that I've read. But The No-Show is really great. It's very different than anything I've read. I feel like a lot of her books are very different, just premise-wise. But this one is about 3 different women who have been stood up by the same guy on Valentine's Day.
The same Valentine's Day?
Maybe.
Did you just uncover the twist of the book?
I don't
hope
know.
not.
You'll just have to read and
I
see.
hope not.
One gets stood up at breakfast, one gets stood up at lunch, one gets stood up at dinner.
okay.
So,
Okay.
maybe you'll just have to read the book.
It's really good.
I will.
I will say, I was very nervous that it would not actually turn out to be a romance.
Yeah.
That this main guy that we're, like, following would turn out to be this awful jerk, and I was, like, getting charmed by him. I guess I was very standoffish about this dude.
Right.
Starting it. I'm like, I feel like there's no way that you can explain this.
Yeah,
you
what
know?
could possibly be your excuse?
Right.
For this?
What is your excuse? But then he's just so sweet. He's so, like, genuine in each of these individual interactions as you're seeing him through the eyes of these women.
Right.
And I'm like, am I getting tricked also?
No.
No, he actually is very sweet. And it all works out for the best in the end.
That's awesome.
I'm so curious how that can be true.
I know. I really am skeptical as well.
It is very good.
But I trust your judgment.
Yes,
so I'm like, okay, something must work.
Yeah. No, it's very good. And I also really liked that all of the women in the book are so different. Like, they seem to have, like, their own very distinct personalities. That's another thing I was a little bit worried about going into it.
Yeah.
Is, like, they're all kind of the main character at one point.
Oh, interesting.
They kind of switch different perspectives. And I was like, surely I'm going to care about someone's story more than another person's, and I'm going to want them with him.
Yeah.
And I really loved all of their stories, and they had such distinct, like, one's very much, like, she's, I forget what she does. She's a life coach, and she's, like, very, like, corporate, girl boss is the wrong word, but, you know, like, she knows what she wants, and she goes after it, and she loves, like, she prioritizes her job. And another is, like, kind of the shy girl that works in, like, a thrift store, and she's kind of got this mysterious past a little bit. She can't open up to him. And another one, she's, like, she's basically the British version of a lumberjack. I forget what they called it, but
that's so funny.
She, like, climbs trees and cuts down branches, and I'm like,
what?
oh my gosh, this is not a romance profession that I've ever heard.
That's so cool.
But they all kind of have their own journeys, and it's very interesting.
Yeah.
So it was very good. I love Beth O'Leary. Highly recommend. Also love the flat share and the switch from her.
Okay.
Those
I've
are
heard
really
of the
good.
flat share. I didn't like a lot of romances. I don't know the authors. I just have
Yes.
heard of titles.
Sure.
So that's cool to make that connection.
The
to realize
flat share
that.
is great. They also have they made a TV show out of that.
Oh,
So I think that's why most people
fun.
have heard of it. But
Yeah.
I think my favorite might have been the switch.
Really.
That one was like basically the holiday where this girl switches houses for like a month or so.
Yeah.
But with her grandmother.
Interesting.
So she goes and lives in a small town.
Yeah.
And with all these old people.
Yeah.
And finds love. Not with an old person.
Good clarification.
Age appropriate love. But her grandma is like, has been widowed or divorced or something. I don't remember. And she goes and lives in her apartment with her granddaughter's roommates. And,
my gosh!
Goes on. She tries dating websites and stuff. It's really cute. It's really sweet. I loved. I feel like her books are just like the premises are so unique.
That is very unique.
That is fun. I'll have to pick that one.
That one's good.
Yeah, yeah.
Really good.
Added to the list.
Yeah.
Yes. There's never a lack of TBR.
No.
If you join this group,
that is the majority of my Goodreads. Is
so true.
To be read.
Yes.
Same.
Well, hopefully you have enjoyed this episode of Book Club. Stay tuned. In a couple weeks, we're going to be bringing you a story that is kind of credited with, like, being the first of the great Russian short stories and kind of bringing that Russian realism that is so classic to anyone who's an English major.
Boy, do we have range on this podcast. We're talking about modern rom-coms. We're also talking about great Russian writers.
There is truly something for everyone.
There's something for everyone.
So, but yeah, I hope you enjoy. And Teresa, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, thanks for listening to this episode of Listen Now, Read Later. You can follow us on Instagram for fun extras and updates on our next episode. If you're interested in buying any of the books that we've mentioned here, you can find our bookshop.org affiliate store and also support local booksellers. And now it's time for you to go read your many books, and we'll catch you when you listen later.